Hello, my name's Tim Shoebridge for Cherry Audio, and on behalf of Cherry Audio, I'm really very excited to be able to give you an overview of their very latest product. Now, before we get into that overview, I think it might be worthwhile just us spending a few minutes going down memory lane back to the late 1970s for just a little bit of synthesizer history. In the late 1970s, a talented independent synth designer by the name of Mario Maggi had a brainchild. His brainchild was an analog polyphonic synthesizer that was going to be more feature-packed, better designed, and better sounding than the competition. That synthesizer was called the Synthex, and the company that helped Mario bring that synthesizer to the market was ELKA. But as feature-packed and wonderful sounding as the Synthex ended up being, there were two problems. The first problem was the ELKA brand. They were best known for home organs and accordions, not for professional synthesizers. And the polysynth market was dominated back then by two American brands. We had the sequential Prophet 5 and Prophet 10, and we had Tom Oberheim's Obi Ranger synthesizers. It was going to take a while for the ELKA Synthex to penetrate that market. But unfortunately, time was not on ELKA's side. They released the Synthex in 1981, and just 2 years later, unbeknown to them and unbeknown to everybody, Yamaha would unleash upon the world their latest digital synthesizer, the DX7. The DX7 had the same effect on the synth market as a meteorite, quite literally. Now, ELKA struggled on for one more year. They stopped production of the Synthex in 1984, and I do believe that was the same year that Sequential stopped production of the Prophet 5. And I read somewhere that in order to try and raise some cash, ELKA were flogging off brand new Synthex synthesizers for just $500 each. So the result of this is that the Synthex is an incredibly rare synthesizer today. I think it's remained one of the synth world's best kept secrets. But that is, maybe, until now. This is Elka-X from Cherry Audio. It's Cherry Audio's faithful recreation of the original ELKA Synthex, but with a few little choice additions to bring it into the modern world. You'll see there the interface. It's a very, very impressive interface. There's an awful lot of controls there, lots of buttons, lots of dials, and a few sliders thrown in as well. It does look complicated when you first take a look at it, but actually it's not complicated, as I hope you'll agree once we dig in and take a look. Now, there's a lot of functionality here. We're not going to cover it all in this video, so what I want to do in this video is just cover some of the basics, give you an overview of what this synthesizer has got to offer, and we'll dig into some of the details in a subsequent video. Okay, so let's start at the beginning of the signal chain, which means the oscillators, and you'll see here that we have two of them. Now, on the original Synthex, these were implemented as DCOs, digitally controlled oscillators, which means that they generated an analog waveform, an imperfect analog waveform, but the clock speed was digitally controlled, which means the tuning was really, really accurate with the Synthex from the moment you switched it on. Now you see by the controls here that these oscillators are identical. They've got exactly the same set of controls each. On the left hand side we have an octave range setting, so it goes from 16 feet all the way up to 1 foot. Then we have a transpose setting, which is obviously a quantized semitone setting from 0 up to 12, so that's from 0 up to 1 octave. Next to that we have a tune control, or a fine tune control. I think it's plus or minus 50 cents. Now on the original Synthex there was just the one tune control, and it was to detune oscillator number 2. Here with the ELKA-X, they provided 2 tune controls so that we can tune each oscillator independently, and that's a really great feature when it comes on to some of the modulation effects, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, next to the tune control, we have the waveforms, and you'll see there we just got the normal waveforms that was on any analog synth back then in the very late 70s, early 80s. We've got triangle, sawtooth, square wave, and then we have a square wave where you can adjust the pulse width, and you'll see there we have a control where you can manually set that pulse width as well as being able to modulate it. Now, next to those standard waveforms, we've got a couple of extra interesting buttons. We've got oscillator pulse width modulation, and this is really quite interesting. It is the ability to modulate the pulse width of one of the oscillators with the other oscillator. So clearly the other oscillator's frequency will have an effect on the sound as well as the waveform that you choose, and you've got that for both oscillator number 1 and oscillator number 2. And then next to that we've got ring mod, and again we've got ring mod on both of the oscillators so that you can choose which is the carrier and which is the modulator. So once the audio from the oscillators and the noise generator are mixed together, they naturally then go into the filter section, and that's what we'll look at next. Here is the filter section. It's a multi-mode filter, which is really cool. Now on the ELKA-X, we've got 2 low pass modes, 2 band pass modes, and a high pass mode. I believe on the original Synthex there was just 1 low pass mode, which was a 24 dB filter, but here on the ELKA-X we've got 24 and 12 dB. You've got all the controls that you'd expect. We've got frequency control, resonance, a control for keyboard tracking, and yes, in low pass filter mode the filter will self-oscillate and it can track the keyboard so you can play it. And we've got a control here to set the amount of modulation of frequency by the filter envelope. And talking of envelopes, here is our filter envelope, dedicated envelope to the filter, standard design, attack, decay, sustain, release with a velocity control at the end, and we have a dedicated amplifier envelope, attack, decay, sustain, release with velocity. Right, so we've talked about the envelope generators, now let's talk about the LFOs. You'll see here we've actually got 2 of them. This is the main LFO, LFO number 1, and we've got LFO number 2 below. We'll talk about that in a little while. So LFO number 1, it's a fully featured LFO, pretty standard stuff. We've got quite a good selection of waveforms. We've got triangle, sawtooth, reverse sawtooth, and then we've got 2 flavors of square wave. Now in the original Synthex, the square wave was bipolar. It went above and below 0, which is not particularly useful if you want to use it to modulate pitch. So what Cherry Audio have done is they've provided us with 2 flavors here. This is the original bipolar, and then we have a unipolar. And we've also got here random, which is random values, sample and hold, basically. And while we're looking at these buttons here, we've also got a reset button, so you can reset the LFO on note on, which is really, really handy. We'll talk about the controls above just briefly. We've got the normal stuff, we've got the frequency, the speed of the LFO. Because this is a modern reincarnation of the Synthex, we've got the ability to sync it to MIDI clock, which is great. We've got a delay control, so you can delay the onset of the LFO, which is a pretty advanced feature. Now, here we've got depth A and depth B, and we need to look below at the routings, as they're called here, or the modulation destinations. we have got A and B routings. So under A, we can modulate both the pitches of the oscillators, the pulse widths of the oscillators, and for B, we can modulate the filter cutoff, amplitude, and sequencer rate. And yes, I haven't talked about the sequencer at all yet, but we've got a really fully featured sequencer on the Elka-X, as was on the original Synth-X. We'll cover that in a subsequent video. Now, coming back to these routings on the main LFO, as I said, we've got A and B. So these first four relating to the oscillators, we've got their own depth control for those. So we can set a real subtle bit of vibrato going on there, while we have a bit more of an aggressive modulation with the routings here under B, which is cutoff, amplitude, and sequencer rate. So this is a very simple patch. We're just listening to one of the oscillators, some low pass filter. I'm just going to use the LFO here to modulate the filter. So what I thought was we'd use the triangle wave. Let's just add a bit in and see what that sounds like. What I thought I'd do is use the delay so it just comes in gradually. Let's set it to about there. About trying a reverse effect. Let's use the reverse Sawtooth and slow this down a bit. Let's try that. So I've got a bit of an effect here. I'm using some reverb. We haven't talked about effects yet. But there are actually 3 effects available on the Elka-X. On the original Synth-X, there was just one, which was chorus effect. We have that same one here, but we have 3 strengths of chorus. We've got echo added and reverb added, so the echo and the reverb have been added by Cherry Audio. I think it's a great idea. It kind of rounds off the instrument. It makes it kind of a just a standalone instrument. You can just sit down and play. You don't have to worry about adding extra effects, external effects at all. So we've got these delay effects and reverb, and at the moment we're listening to plate reverb, and it does sound really, really nice. Okay, let's get on to LFO number 2. So when I look at this LFO 2 section here, it does look a little bit odd to me, because we've got these sliders, where as everywhere else on the front panel, it's very consistent. We've got rotary dials and buttons. And you really have to look at a photograph of an original Synth-X to see why that is. I'll show you a photograph now. Now this section here with these sliders is actually the performance section of the Synth-X. It's where you have control over pitch bend and modulation wheel capabilities. Now the Synth-X didn't have separate mod wheel and pitch bend wheels. It had a joystick. If you moved the joystick up and down vertically, then you were controlling pitch bend, and if you moved it left and right, you had kind of mod wheel kind of capabilities going on there. And with these sliders, you're controlling what that joystick does. And obviously on your MIDI controller keyboard, you'll be controlling what your pitch bend wheel and mod wheel do. So we do have an LFO, LFO number 2. It's a very simple LFO. It's just got the one waveform, which is a triangle wave, and you can't change that. This slider sets its frequency, as you can see there by the LED, how fast or slow it's flashing. And with that LFO, we can modulate oscillator pitch, which is both oscillators together, so that the master pitch. We can modulate pitch, and we can modulate filter cutoff. Now with either of these modulations, so let's just whack up the filter modulation to maximum. If I play some notes, nothing happens, because both of these modulations, all LFO number 2 modulations, are controlled by the mod wheel. So I have to turn up the mod wheel to get the modulation like this. Now, when the mod wheel is all the way down, there is no modulation at all. It's completely flat. If you want there to be a little bit of modulation, even with the mod wheel all the way down, then we've got this slider over here which sets the initial amount. So I can set it to be maybe something a little bit subtle like that. And then when I use the mod wheel, it increases the modulation. And that works the same for filter cutoff as it does for pitch. So that's the LFO number 2. We can control pitch, we can control filter cutoff, but it's always using the mod wheel. Now, if you've maybe noticed here, this frequency slider is just not called frequency, it's called initial frequency. And we've got a slider next to it called frequency acceleration. And this is quite an interesting feature with LFO number 2. We can set its initial frequency, how fast it's running. But with this slider, we can actually affect that frequency as we turn up the mod wheel. So let's go with filter modulation as an example. So I've whacked up this frequency acceleration slider all the way to maximum. So this is the maximum effect. As I turn up the mod wheel, not only am I increasing the amount of modulation of the filter cutoff, but I'm also increasing the frequency of LFO number 2 thanks to this slider here. It can be really subtle down here. Or it can go crazy right at the top. Some really nice effects. It's a really quite advanced feature to be able to modulate not just frequency cutoff and pitch, but also the speed with which you are modulating them, just all with the mod wheel with this little slider here. It's a really nice touch. Okay, so that's LFO number 2. Then you'll see that we've just got 2 more sliders to talk about, and they are labeled bend. So with pitch bend, we can do what a pitch bend wheel normally does, which is affect pitch by using this slider here, and we can turn that off if we like and not modulate pitch at all, and we can modulate the filter cutoff. So let's just show how it works as a pitch bend wheel. Now this has got nothing to do with LFO number 2 at all. It is just a performance control, nothing to do with LFO number 2. If I whack that up to maximum and I use the pitch bend wheel, so we've got a maximum of 1 octave up, 1 octave down. But I can control that range with this slider. So if I just do very slightly like that, let's see what that sounds like. That's all the way up. So I could hold down some notes, turn my pitch bend wheel all the way up, and then get it in tune. Something like that. So, performance controls with an LFO built in. Very, very nice to have. One more thing to talk about here, or actually I didn't mention, but the frequency of the LFO can be synced to MIDI clock, just like the frequency of LFO number 1 can be. But one thing to mention, I haven't mentioned yet, we've got a little switch here. It's a three-way switch. It says upper, both, and lower. And I haven't mentioned this at all because it's going to be the subject of the next video. But this is, for me, the most powerful feature of the Elka-X and of the original Synth-X, and that is the fact that the Synth-X was a multi-timbral synthesizer. It actually had two completely separate synth voices in it. You could create two completely different patches and either split them on the keyboard or layer them on top of each other. Really, really incredibly powerful. And so what this little switch is doing is saying, these performance controls, do we apply them to just one of those layers or to both of them at the same time, which is a really, powerful performance feature. We'll talk about layers in the next video. It's really very powerful. We'll also get on and talk about the arpeggio and the step sequencer. So that'll be coming up next time.